What are some serial killer facts about serial killers that you find extremely interesting? Dennis Rader, aka BTK, Bind Torture Hill, started communicating with police after years of silence in like 2004-ish. He had gone decades without being caught and once again started sending taunting letters and items to them. He asked them if he could be traced if he sent them his writings on a floppy disk, and they assured him through a communication in a newspaper that no, they couldn't trace him. He sent them a floppy disk and they found metadata linking to his church. He was arrested shortly thereafter. He was hurt that they would lie to him because he thought they had developed a rapport. The serial killer Belakis liked to pickle people in barrels stored in his basement. Someone figured it out, but they couldn't get him because he was fighting in World War I. By the time they tracked him down, he had disappeared and left a dead guy in his hospital bed. He supposedly joined the French Foreign Legion and deserted that too. And I think history loses track of him after that. With the exception of one possible sighting as a janitor in New York. The janitor disappeared before anyone could confirm it. I believe the only reason they found the barrels was because they believed he was storing gas and there was a massive shortage on it at the time. Bella was away at war. So they broke in his garage to find the barrels. Only they didn't find gasoline. Mac Ray Edwards. He was a serial killer who worked for Caltrans. He'd kill his victims and then bury the bodies in places he would later help build the highways over. Not all his victims have been found. And many are very likely still under some of the California highways you may have driven over countless times. Edit. Thanks for the silver. I appreciate it. The Hillside Stranglers picked up a young woman to murder. Then they discovered that her father was Peter Lorre, a legendary Hollywood character actor. They let her go because they feared that killing a celebrity's daughter would bring too much attention down. The Golden State Killer, known at the time as the East Area Rapist, would often break into the homes of couples, making the woman tie up the man. He would stack dishes on the back of the man and threaten that if he heard the dishes fall, he would kill everyone in the house. Then he would grape the woman repeatedly and ransack the house for hours. At a community meeting about the rapist, a macho man stood up and went on a rant about how a real man would never let such a thing happen to him or his wife. The rapist proceeded to attack that man and his wife soon after, meaning he was attending the community meeting about himself. I don't recall which one it was, but I remember hearing that there was a killer who would only go into the home if the front door was unlocked because otherwise he didn't feel welcome. Lock your doors, people. I swear I only lock my door at nights because I heard about this guy. My partner makes fun of me because we live in the end of nowhere and no one locks their doors. But we haven't been killed by delusional vampire murderers even once. So who's the real idiot? Partner? Albert Fish would stick needles into his pelvis when he was masturbating. Stick them so deep sometimes they would get stuck. He told this to police. They didn't believe him until they saw the x-ray. This is hardly the most ducked up thing about him. Dude cooked and ate a little girl and then sent a letter to her parents about what she tasted like. I got to read that actual letter at the Museum of Death in New Orleans. The more disturbing part to me was his retelling of how he met and lured the victim. And how big a role the mom unintentionally played in her death. He went over to their home and had lunch with the family. Then he invited the daughter to a party and the mom let her go. Alone. Then he describes what happened at the party. I cannot imagine reading that letter as the mom and knowing how easily you could have prevented it. I am surprised we don't hear more about Robert Hansen in popular culture. He would kidnap women and turn them loose in the Alaskan wilderness, where he would then hunt them down like animals and kill them. He didn't have the highest number of victims, but his method of hunting them for sport is absolutely insane. He's not the only one to have done it. I forgot his name, but apparently a wealthy Mexican politician had the same MO. He once spared a girl and returned her to the street because she refused to run. Sadly, she was not believed and he killed several more before being arrested. Jeffrey Dahmer didn't eat people with tattoos because he said the ink made the flesh taste weird. Be safe. Get inked. How did he know? He ate one. In the John Wayne G case, there were so many bodies crammed underneath the house that the bodies melted together and the bones had to be sorted for more than 2 years to put together the full skeletons. Piggybacking on this, since it's on JWG and I just read a book on him. Apparently one of the ways he would de-escalate a police search for his victims was by calling into the police station anonymously and reporting a fake sighting of the victim. This led the police to believe that the victims had not in fact been missing, but instead had run away, thus deprioritizing their search. Pedro Alonso Lopez pleaded guilty to the murders of 100 plus girls and only received a maximum sentence of 16 years, as that was the maximum possible sentence in Ecuador. He was released despite promising to continue killing but disappeared shortly after. What are the odds that a victim's family had something to do with that? It's thought he killed over 350 kids. It was probably a race to see which family could find him first. I surprised no one ended his life in prison. Pee Wee Gaskins. Most prolific serial killer in SC drove around in a hearse with a bumper sticker that read "I haul dead people." He told people that he needed it to take the bodies of people he killed to his private cemetery. He claimed to have killed between 100 and 110 people. Edit, a typo. Ted Bundy helped in the investigation of the Green River Killer and made a psych profile which ended up being closer to the actual Green River Killer than the FBI's own psych profile. That was also a huge part of the inspiration for Silence of the Lambs. Bundy also tried to masturbate to photos of his crime scene when Detective Keppel brought them in, which is why he stopped letting Bundy keep the files. I've been hearing little facts about Bundy for years now, and I always manage to learn some new ducked up thing. That most serial killers have roughly average, often below average IQs. And their reputation as smart and difficult to catch is because of a couple of high profile outliers and the fact that their victims are usually the sort of people who cops and society don't pay as much attention to. It's an uncomfortable fact that a murder with no witnesses and no obvious motive is by its own nature extremely difficult to solve. By targeting people you have no relation to, with only intrinsic motive, your chances of being caught are already slim. Jeffrey Dahmer gave the people in his apartment building sandwiches that could have possibly been made from his victims' flesh. How Jack the Ripper always cut the throats of his victims in a way that stops blood from getting on his clothes. Just stand behind them. Yes. Police? This guy right here. I think the fact that Ed Gein only killed 2 people is amazing because he is one of the most well-known serial killers. Charles Manson was never convicted of actually killing anyone himself. John Douglas of Mindhunter Game actually talks about that in the book. Says basically the reason that his parole kept getting denied was because he would have attracted such a group of nuts they couldn't release him for public safety. I find it interesting that apparently the BTK killer installed alarms at several people's houses because of their fear of the BTK killer. Richard Kuklinski killed a man and left his body in an oil drum outside of a diner just to see how long it would take for someone to investigate. He would order sandwiches from the place and sit on the drum while he ate. He also made a clicking noise with his mouth when he was angry. If you heard that, you were as good as dead. If you like serial killers, UFOs, conspiracy theories, and stuff like that, I can't recommend Last Podcast on the Left enough. It's insanely informative. And also insanely funny. Kuklinski is my favorite episode by them. Aside from the killing, BTK is such a self-serving, pompous piece of shit. He actually makes people fill out an application to write him in prison. Guy gave an acceptance speech at his own sentencing. How narcissistic can you get? Not about any particular serial killer. That serial killers have fandoms and apologists who insist they did nothing wrong. Edit. Thanks for making this my top comment. Cough Columbine cough. Columbine has it bad with this issue. Especially with the lady that almost shot up the school again but died for some reason naked in the woods nearby. It's weird and disturbing. In the 70s there was a serial killer who was known for raping and killing women. He went on a dating show and the woman ended up choosing him, but luckily she cancelled the date just before. You can find a video on YouTube. It's really creepy. Mark Brandon Reed, aka Chopper, was a renowned killer in Australia. However, he only targeted drug dealers and people who made attempts on his life. When he got old, he was told he had liver cancer and had only a few weeks to live. He was asked by the television show 60 Minutes Australia if he wanted one last interview before he died. He accepted. When asked about all the murderers, which he previously claimed as self-defense, not him or he covered them up, he just confessed to all of them, claiming they were never self-defense and he had committed the ones he previously denied. Then he passed away a few weeks later. Went out listing everyone he killed. It shocked everyone. I would suggest looking him up. He's very interesting. That some of them kill just because they enjoy doing it. Like a person might enjoy fishing or having a nice meal, some people just kill others because they enjoy it in some way. The interview with Arthur Shawcross really stuck with me, as he described the people he killed and was so calm and nonchalant about it. Like it was something he did as commonly as using the bathroom or eating a meal. Ted Bundy was known to only sleep on his left side during the first quarter of 1975. This is scarily specific. John Norman Collins used to pick up women on his motorcycle. The bodies of his victims, women, used to be dumped here and there, but they were always washed. Turns out he only killed women who were on their period. Also, he was referred to as John Norman Collins during his trial. He later changed his last name to Chapman, because there was a lawyer in town whose name was John Collins and this was a way to distinguish between them. Brazilian serial killer Little Petty murdered over 40 people in prison. He began by murdering the gang that held his girlfriend and then stabbing his father, who was imprisoned for killing his mother. During a visit, he was well liked because he was considered a sort of vigilante avenger. Despite killing indiscriminately within prison, no difference between drug possession and a murder. Because of Brazil's odd sentencing laws, he could only serve maximum of 30 years. And is currently a YouTuber and ranch hand, I think. In 1985, the Night Stalker was terrorizing LA. I was a young Marine there and a friend asked if me and another guy would come stay the night since her parents had to go out of town. I thought it was silly. He hadn't hit Orange County, but anything to get out of the barracks. That night he hit just a few houses down in Mission Viejo. Some kid heard him and alerted his dad, who called the cops. That was the first lead they got. It has always bugged me that I didn't take it seriously at all. And it happened that close. I think we were pretty drunk that night. It was pretty sobering. My grandmother met Ted Bundy on her college campus, and he attempted to get her friend to go off with him. My grandmother said she got a bad vibe from him because he was such a happy person, and she felt like he was forcing the emotion a bit much. Her friend, however, wanted to go with him and was completely blinded by his charm. My grandmother took her friend by the hand and walked away. She said his face changed completely as they did. It's crazy to me that with charm and looks alone, girls were willing to go with him even after several had gone missing or had been found dead. Jeffrey Dahmer was neglected by his parents in childhood and hadn't even seen his mother for 10 years prior to incarceration. At sentencing, his father and stepmother asked for 10 minutes to say goodbye and hug. His father often visited him in prison and he had weekly phone calls with his mother. Despite the heinous crimes, they seemed to have some kind of unconditional love. It makes all of the stories I hear about estrangement seem to have a different, strange perspective. Many years ago I read the entire police report on the Green River Killer. I was fascinated by his attempts to cover his tracks by buying new car tires and destroying shoes and getting new ones after murders, to avoid leaving traceable tracks behind. Also fascinating that he took the jewelry off his victims and left it in the ladies' restroom at his workplace and got off on seeing the found jewelry on various women around the office. If you wrote John Wayne Gacy, he would send you a questionnaire to see if you were good enough to be friends with him. Many victims did survive David Parker, the toy box killer, but did not remember it, as he would kidnap victims, use them as sex slaves for a few months, drug them, and cleaned them thoroughly before dropping them off unconscious at the side of the road hundreds of miles away. Only some women picked up by him were killed. Still more than enough to be classified as a serial killer. Ted Bundy was raised to believe that his mother was his older sister. Jack Nicholson was raised the same way. Always adds an additional twist to the nature vs nurture debate. The first serial killer on written record is from 5th century Yemen. Also according to an FBI and private study in the US in 2018. They estimate anywhere between 150 to 2,000 active serial killers in the US.